in votes. But I think that people see that actually in this country, we want a strong economy, but we want a fair society too. And the only way you get that is with Liberal Democrats in the next government.
Danny Alexander, thank you very much. Now, after Danny Alexander, the next most senior man in the Treasury is the Conservative, David Gauke. He's strategic oversight for the entire UK tax system, so he should be in a good position to tell us how the Tories will pay for all these tax giveaways that are mounting up. He joins me now. Welcome to the programme. Inheritance tax. How many families in the UK pay inheritance tax?
Well, at the moment, it's around about 6% of all estates pay inheritance tax.
How many?
It's tens of thousands. But what we're going to see over the next 5 years is a significant increase in that, because if you look at the OBR projections, we will see a doubling of the proportion of households who are going to be dragged into inheritance tax. And unless the government takes action, we are going to find inheritance tax, rather than being aimed at the very wealthy, which is its original intention, is dragging in households of relatively modest means.
You could simply index link it then, where the threshold starts. The most recent data from your government is 16,000. It's fewer than 3% of deaths result in a payment in inheritance tax. It's a massive tax cut you're proposing for a tiny proportion of well-off families.
No, I don't accept that. In fact, I think for the numbers you'll find for this year, it's going to be around about 6% of estates.
Well, even 6%.
And it's going up to about 12% of estates. And you've got to remember, in a lot of cases, estates are where the first spouse, if you like, dies and passes all the money on to the surviving spouse, and no inheritance tax is paid there. So that explains to some extent why the numbers are what they are. But we are seeing more and more more and more estates are going to be dragged into inheritance tax, with property prices increasing. And unless government takes action, this is going to become a tax for a much wider proportion of the population than we believe it should be.
But it's going to cost £1 billion a year. It is, even if more people are going to pay it, it's only going to benefit a tiny proportion of the overall country, mostly in the southeast of England. It's really further proof you are the party of the rich and the comfortable. That's who you look after.
No, I don't accept that. And of course, the way in which we are paying for increasing the threshold for the family home is by increasing taxes on high earners because of reforms of pension tax relief. So this is being paid for by those earning more than £150,000. But we do believe that inheritance tax, yes, it should be there for wealthy estates, but it's becoming much broader than it was before. And even at the moment, with 6% of 6% of estates paying inheritance tax, that's almost twice the proportion than in the last year of the Labour government.
But you see, we live in an age when affluent middle-class kids already have so many advantages. And we can see that in the lack of social mobility, including in your own party. So why come up with a tax kid that gives these affluent middle-class kids, when they're growing up, even more, when surely the priority should be to help aspiring working-class kids who have none of these advantages?
Well, the way that we're dealing with that is reforming our education system. We've got more children in outstanding schools than we did 5 years ago. Expanding apprenticeships, 2.2 million in this Parliament, 3 million in the next Parliament. The way we do that is cutting taxes on hard-working families by increasing the personal allowance.
Why not put the £1 billion into a social mobility fund for bright kids?
But look, I think there is a particular...
Why wouldn't you do that?
Well, I think there is a particular issue with the fact that inheritance tax is now hitting, and over the next 5 years will increasingly hit, not particularly prosperous families. And we think it's a perfectly reasonable human instinct to want to be able to pass on the family home to the next generation without seeing a large chunk of that being taken away in tax. If these kids have had a good upbringing, a good education, good parents, a nice home, why do they need any more? Well, I don't think it's right that we try to clobber large numbers of families with inheritance tax, which I think has a place in our tax system, but designed for the top end, for the wealthiest of families. And as I say, this is something that's going to become increasingly prevalent over the next 5 years if government does not take action, and the Conservatives will.
In January, David Cameron said, quote, "The real risk to the NHS is the risk of unfunded spending commitments." So why have you just made an £8 billion unfunded spending commitment to the NHS?
Well, the reality is with the NHS is our record speaks for itself, but I'm not sure how many people would have realised that public spending on the NHS has gone up by £7.3 billion in real terms over the course of this Parliament. We've managed to do that in a period of great fiscal difficulties.
All right,
and what
but
we're
let's
saying,
park that.
and what we're saying, we can do that again.
How will you fund an extra £8 billion a year by 2020?
Well, what we're saying is expenditure on the NHS will be a priority for the Conservative government,
Sure,
as it has been a priority for the government
but how
over
will
the
you
course
fund
of
it?
the last 5 years. And with a strong economy, we will ensure that when it comes to the spending review, we will make sure the resources are there to fulfil Simon Stevens' plan for the NHS.
So,
given the circumstances we face of demographic changes, far more people over the age of 70, right, for example, it is going to be very important for the government to ensure that they can back the NHS in the way that it needs to be done, and we will do that.
So, I mean, you've promised an extra £8 billion for the NHS. It's all just going to be magically come out from economic growth. You can't give me any example of where the money will come from. You've promised tax cuts of over £7 billion. That takes us, what, to £15 billion. You're going to freeze rail fares for 5 years. Something's really... Can you tell me, where is this magic money tree you found? Where is it located? Because we'd all like a slice.
But Andrew, look at our record. In the last 5 years, we have increased the personal allowance very dramatically. In the last 5 years, we've increased spending on the NHS.
And all of that has slowed down your deficit reduction. Where is the extra £15 billion of unfunded tax rises, tax cuts going to come from?
In the last 5 years, we've cut the deficit by half as a proportion of GDP. In the last 2 years...
Which is nothing like what you promised.
In the last 2 years, we have frozen rail fares, regulated rail fares. So what I would say is, look at the record that we've had. Over the last 5 years, we've achieved all of these things at a time where we've had to deal with the Eurozone crisis, high commodity prices at times, the after effects of the financial crash, and yet we have still delivered that because we have a plan and it is working. We're seeing the economy growing
let's
strongly.
get this clear, though, because it seems to me that both the extra money for the NHS and the tax cuts you're talking about, they're all entirely dependent on economic growth. Now, David Cameron said only recently that the red warning lights are flashing on the global economy. If we were to enter another recession, maybe through no fault of our own, in this next Parliament, none of this would happen, correct?
Well, again, I would point to the record that we have had. We've gone through some difficult periods of time over the last 5 years.
But if there's no economic growth, if we enter a recession in, say, 2017-18, which is perfectly possible on the business cycle, there would be no money to pay for these promises because it's all dependent on growth. Is that not a fair assessment?
Well, look, economic growth, of course, is important. But again, I point you to the record over the last 5 years, is that, yes, we had to look at where the economy was, given the way the Eurozone crisis was having an effect on us. And you raised the deficit point earlier, and we showed flexibility on that in those particular circumstances. But we are working with growth projections produced by the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. We are forecast to have strong growth over the next few years, thanks to our long-term economic plan. And in those circumstances, I believe we can do what we've done over the last 5 years. We can reduce the deficit, we can reduce income tax, and we can spend more on the NHS.
Okay.
That's what the Conservatives deliver in government.
Okay, David Gauke, thank you very much.